Good to be back with you. My last show was on Tuesday of last week, and I took somewhat of an unplanned vacation. It's kind of interesting. I started off my last video on Tuesday talking about the fact that I needed a vacation and didn't realize that I'd be off air for 3 days in a row. Well, we were out, took a chance to go out and spend some time with two or three friends. Just to talk about the future and talk about some things that were coming. But it's good to be back today. We didn't have good reception out there, so I waited. And by the time I got back on Friday, I said, let me just wait to get started today. But here we are today, and another shooting has taken place. And my question simply is, whose story will you believe? And this is so crucial, when people hear about these shootings, and for some of you, you may not know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an officer-involved shooting right up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm in Oklahoma City. They're about an hour and a half up the road. And this officer, Betty Shelby, shoots a man named Terrence Crutcher. Apparently, it looked like that he was walking away when the officer was giving him commands. And it looks like he got tased, then it looks like he got shot. I don't know if he got shot while he was standing up or if he was reaching in his SUV at the time, but the video's on the internet. You can look at it for what it is. And then there's a quote by either someone in the helicopter or someone says, oh, that's one bad dude. I guess looking at the size of this black man. And so, it's a heartache to have to even do a video like this, and I don't do a lot of this just happened type news, but this happened I believe last Friday, and he was a twin. I guess his twin. She's done a press conference and spoken about the issue. But yes, another apparently an unarmed black man is dead. This is another incident where I'm sure some will be able to say that he wasn't obeying commands. A little bit of the larger story, I believe, is that he was not listening to the commands, but apparently his vehicle was broken down in the middle of the highway or in the middle of a street and had called for help. So why it turned into a hostile situation, I don't know. And, some people would say, well, if he would have just obeyed the police officers, etc. I don't know. But that's my question today. And this is such an important question. And I'm not just going to talk about this situation in Tulsa, but I want to talk about a larger narrative. Because right now, people will typically choose sides, or actually, people will already be on Facebook expressing different thoughts based on the side they're already on. Whether that's, well, he should have just obeyed the police officers, or whether this is another example of systemic racism. So I've discovered, as we've done a lot of these conversations to see unity, not only in the church, but in society, that there's more than one conversation taking place. Now, what I mean by that is, it's not just a conversation about what's going on now, but what we believe about what's going on now is actually rooted in the history that we believe about this country. If you talk to a lot of people based on how they were educated in schools, a lot of people's narrative has simply come down to what have blacks done, what have they contributed to society, and what's their worth or their value in the larger conversation. Why don't they just comply with the people who are running society? And I know these are hard words, but hear me out. These conversations are rooted oftentimes in the history that people have. And if you do a little bit of digging, you tell me what you find out. But when I do my digging and I start asking people questions, it's almost like, and I'm just talking about the black-white conversation. I know there are more nationalities well worth being respected, but if you talk to the Native Americans, they'll have another version of American history. But if we talk about the black-white conversation, you literally have at least two different stories about the history of America. You know, we should almost call American history American who story. Whose story are you telling? And, you know, this is like trying to resolve a conflict between a husband and a wife, and you listen to the husband's version of what happened, and then you listen to the wife's version of what happened. You know, this is when being judicial has everything to do with what we're going to believe going forward, because in a lot of situations, you know, if I'm to use this marriage example, what you believe about somebody's character is huge, and it comes out of which party you believe. Because if you listen to the husband, you're going to hear one story. And if you just hear the husband's side of the story, you start thinking that this woman, man, she shouldn't even be married. Why in the world should a man have to put up with this? But then if you silence him and you don't hear his side of the story first, then you hear her side of the story. Then you start thinking this man needs to be in jail somewhere. Who would marry a creep like that? And you start going to the other side. And that's how it is with the history of this country. If you listen to some people, they say, oh my goodness, someone mentions race. Oh, there they go again, pulling the race card. Oh, there they go again, making excuses for not achieving anything in society. There they go again, making excuses. It's their men and women having babies out of wedlock. It's their families that are broken down. That's their problem. If they knew how to solve that problem, then they'd have something to say on the larger stage. You could hear that side of the story, you could hear the other side of the story, where you begin to talk about, you know, systemic injustice and systems of oppression and mass incarceration and a whole different story. Well, I just want to simply settle on just one thought. And I've heard people say, when people preach a message, they say the same thing over and over again, 1,000 different ways. I totally agree with that. But here's what I want you to think about. Compassion versus insensitivity. At least listen. You know, at least listen to someone's side of the story that you haven't heard before. Because there's even a proverb that says, you know, that we got to be careful when we hear one side of the story. Because when you only hear one side of the story, you're ready to go and judge the situation until you hear the other person's side of the story. And it can change everything. Or you're talking about sometimes you see some man that's all acting a fit. And I don't know if you ran into some females like I've seen in some of these conversations. But when you ask enough questions, all of a sudden you find out that she looks like the victim, but she is queen, right? Or vice versa. You see some man's got a Bible under his arm and looks like he's doing all the right stuff and she's the complete problem and all that. But then you ask enough questions, you start to hear a different story. Well, when I think about these shootings and these things that take place, I want you to even think about some of the other things that go into a narrative like this. And you would say, well, how in the world could blacks, or how in the world could people just jump to defend a man who obviously was not obeying the commands of these police officers? And I'm going to tell you, even for me, I'm thinking, you know, I would do what's right if I ever got pulled over, etc., or I'd be respectful or whatever I'm supposed to do. But when you think about the conversations and the things that have taken place just in these last handful of years, I hope I would make the right decision. I hope I would be completely willing to be compliant, especially if someone had a gun drawn on me and I knew this might be it. Would I just continue to comply? Would I be in a pressure situation and comply? Well, a lot of this connects to what I've been mentioning, is that there are at least two histories of America. So I'll share with you some of my history. I remember when it had to be late 70s, because when we were in St. Louis, I was single digits, you know, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, or at least early 80s. And we were at the barber shop. And you have these moments in life that mark you, and they stain your memory, and you can't get it out. But I never forget seeing the pictures in a Jet magazine. And Jet magazine, for y'all that don't know it, it's a black magazine, and anybody who's black probably knows what a Jet magazine is. And in there they had the story of Emmett Till. And I read the whole story. Read how his mama walks in and has to see his body. This young man had flirted with a white female. He was from the north, I believe he was from Chicago or something like that. And these men, these white men came, actually took him from the home or his uncle's house where he was staying, drug him away from the uncle's house, and tortured him in a barn. And someone who was there said they heard the horrifying screams and murdered him. And his mother did an open casket to show his mutilated body as a statement, and it really impacted the civil rights movement. And now this was in I believe it was 55. I looked this up. August 28th, 1955 was when he was murdered. So when I'm a little boy sitting at the barbershop reading this Jet magazine, I was marked forever. And when you see things like that, it gives you a different perspective on history. So now it's hard to untangle that experience and those things that take place from the present that you live in. How you process what you've seen determines how you see or how you handle the things that are going on in life today. I also remember seeing the story of George Stinney Jr. He was the youngest man, I believe, still probably, who's ever been executed at 14 years old. Some of the kind of same, maybe he was accused of a murder or an attack or something like that, but at 14 years old, he was wrongly accused, and he was electrocuted at age 14. And they have a remake of the video on YouTube. You can look it up, George Stinney Jr. And for me, the things that I've seen are different than the things that others have seen. So I don't expect someone to even be thinking or have the same level of compassion or be willing to ask certain questions, whether they're to exonerate a man who wasn't listening to the police. I don't expect others to follow the same train of thought that I have. But when you've grown up and you've heard stories of injustice throughout your life, and several of them have hit close to home, then you begin to see the world a different way. It doesn't mean that you disrespect authority. It doesn't mean that you're not compliant to the way society is supposed to be run, but you also have a desire to see a higher level of accountability. And don't add in there the modern issues of our time when you think about mass incarceration. For those of you who don't know about it, just read the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. But I'm just talking about the simple fact that there are two stories, at the very least, thank you. There's at least two stories. If you talk to whites or those who maybe have just heard history in the classroom and public education versus those who have had experiences growing up in the black community, or like me as a little boy watching or reading the stories about an Emmett Till, or hearing the stories about the 4 little girls who were blown up at 16th Street Baptist Church. When you hear these stories and it's your friends who have been locked up for XYZ, or it's your friends who are locked up because they had drugs in their possession, and then you know that you've been around other friends who were white, who were breaking the law too, and they never went to jail. Or then you look in the paper and you hear of a man a young white male who rapes a female while she's unconscious behind a garbage dump. And then you hear about, another black man who's fighting with dogs and gets, 18 months? He gets 3 months. You hear about these things constantly. This is normal conversation for some of us. It's our normal. It's the normal thing that we see constantly. It's not something that goes in and out. The rest of the country is catching up to it because of cell phones and videos and the fact that it can't be hidden in some cases. But man, if if we are those who profess Christ, there at least has to be some compassion to where we say, I will at least ask my brothers and sisters who do have colored skin and ask them, what's your perspective on things? Why is that your perspective? And talk and find out what is truth. So this is one of the reasons why, I realized that history in the scriptures was recorded by the prophets. This is an important point, at least I think it is. The history was written by the prophets. Now, when they were writing, these are people who would fast and pray for months at a time, right? Because they were writing history. And without that objectivity, without that God perspective on history, a person will write history based on what will benefit them. Someone will write history based on what they think, because it's going to put them in a greater position. I mean, why would okay, all right, between my wife and I, if you ask me how good of a husband I've been, I'm going to start telling you the good stuff. Well, I'm a little bit away from that part now. I try to go to the raw stuff so people don't think I'm too wonderful, because I'm not. But just generically speaking, the natural heart just you want yourself to look good. So if someone asks me about, tell me about your marriage, or tell me about some things you've done as a husband that are good. Oh, I'll just get to going. Oh man, maybe I could tell you all the wonderful things I've done. But you're asking me for my history to my benefit, not just with objectivity. And if you ask a spouse or wife, what's your vantage point of it? You may hear something totally different. And you'll be glad you heard it. That's why we're glad we have 4 gospels, 4 versions of what Jesus was doing. They're not contrary or conflicting, so that they're there so we can get a fuller story of what took place. Well, y'all, I'm way past my time I try to stick to, which is, I'm not going to tell you because otherwise you'll think I go over all the time. How about I say an hour, and now I'm cutting it short. I'm teasing. But here we have another shooting. And I just want to ask you, whose story will you believe? Be careful just jumping into a narrative. Our whole country is set on 2 different narratives. I heard it written one time that the Civil War was one of the first times that the losing group got to write the history books. So again, you're going to hear it from a different vantage point. Now, I don't know what everybody else is doing, but in the church, in the body of Christ, we cannot be walking that low. We've got to be more sound-minded in our judgment than just to be moved by winds and waves and just to believe everything that goes flying across social media. But a situation like what took place in Tulsa with this shooting, it hurts. It hurts to hear it. It hurts to see it happening again, and it just kind of makes me want to dig a little deeper and keep going. I didn't even want to do this video. I don't like doing videos on topics like these because it's not just mental for me. It's in the heart. And for some, this conversation, it's just all mental. I'll just obey the police. I'll just do what the police say. Oh, here we go again. Look, I'm just talking to y'all who are willing to have a real conversation with other people. And we can't be offended for those who understand the story of those who are people of color, or those who have been on the other side of police brutality, or who have fears. You may understand it. We also have a responsibility to be patient with those who don't. This is a great time for character to shine. And if we continue with the character of Christ and we don't back down and we don't go hide in the shadows, something great can still take place. God bless. I'll be back tomorrow, and I think I'm going to do just a little bit more on these 2 narratives about our country and how great of an impact it has on how we are operating today. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for all the likes. Hit share with your friends. If you find me saying anything that's going to help us be on a better course. God bless. Talk to you soon.